So we are actually going to be doing this painting monochromatically, which means that I will only be using one color, and only mixing that color with black or white. And because we are mimicking watercolor, white will actually be usually represented by either white on the paper, or I do recommend having something opaque that you can go over at the end with white. If you're using watercolor, you can use like a white colored pencil, you can use a white jelly roller, you can use white acrylic paint. If you're using colored pencil, you can use white jelly roller, acrylic paint. You can use a little touch of oil paint, all sorts of things. But I do recommend having that for those stars right at the very end. And then you probably want a regular drawing pencil, so a blue paint, black paint, or a blue and a dark color to make that dark of Ruby's head, something white and opaque to do the last bit, and, of course, a piece of paper to do it on. And, of course, we are doing sip and paint, so make sure that you have your wonderful drink. I don't know if you can see, but my cup is very rainbow, so we will call this rainbow quartz. All right. And let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, I'm generally only going to use one layer and assume that this is like a piece of paper. So this will not be the best tutorial for doing digital art as digital, and will be, but I mean, every way you use a piece of art media is a valid way to use it. So let's go ahead and get started. And I'm going to start by really lightly sketching out their heads. And their heads are, oops, these kind of blob shapes down here. And to figure out where to put them, I'm looking at the percentage. On this one, I am going to use layers so I can show you guys what I'm talking about. I'm looking at the percentage of this side that it takes up. So like to figure out where my line goes over here, I figure out about what amount does it take up of this side. And it takes up about, oh, in fact, I think I've even made it too big. It takes up about, what is that, like 1/6 or something? Alright, so then I'm going to come up, because I did see I have it even now a little bit too big. And that's a really good way when you're drawing something out. Don't just think of this thing itself. It's a little bit smaller so it stops doing that. Think of the spaces in between. Because a lot of the time the spaces in between are going to be better for us to figure out what we're making than the objects themselves.
Ruby, thankfully, she's a lot simpler. She's just a blob. And again, I'm looking, so it's like right now there's a little bit too much space between them. So I'm going to give Ruby a slightly bigger head. And then I'm going to make Sapphire's hair come out. And some of this is happening. My canvas is not the exact same ratio as the picture we're copying, which I'm going to guess a lot of you have that as well. And so that is kind of ends up to you. How do you want to deal with the extra space? I'm going to put it between them and kind of actually, I know, Ruby's head got too big there, so I'm going to make that smaller. And make sure that you draw really light. It's just a good habit to get into, and especially with watercolors, if you're using those, you will see the pencil lines through the watercolor usually, so you want to make sure it's pretty clean. And then I'm just going to make up my extra space by having Sapphire's hair come a little bit farther out. And you can even kind of erase those lines if you feel comfortable and know where they are into almost nothingness. Alright. Now, a lot of the rest of this drawing is just kind of changes in color, right? But I do want to come up and I don't want to make it too much. But I am going to put a little circle for the moon. And I'm going to make sure to put the half that's dark. Not only because you can see it, but as someone who draws the moon a lot, for me, leaving that dark section makes sure that I absolutely never ever make that terrible drawing mistake where you put a star in the dark side of the moon. And as someone who cares about astronomy a lot, my comic, in fact, our upcoming comic is a lot about it, I think I might die of embarrassment if I put a star in the dark side of the moon. Now, I'm not going to worry too much about putting the colors around in concentric circles yet. One thing I do want to point out, and this will depend on the medium you're painting in. So if you are doing watercolor, you might want to work very hard to keep this part, the white of the moon, pure white. To the point that if you have something in your watercolor kit that is some kind of resist, including, it might be called resist, it might be called, oh, what's the word for it? There's a specific art word and my mind is blanking on it right now. But it's like a clear fluid, masking fluid. I think there's another more complicated one though too. But it's like a fluid that you paint on. It can be clear, it can be kind of yellowish, it can be kind of milky. And pretty much what it does is it makes a little wax seal on your paper. So you can watercolor on top of that, like you can paint on top of it, and then once it dries, you can peel it off and it'll still be pristine white underneath. It is also, you can use it in layers. So say you wanted some of how these stars are blue, we're not going to actually use it for the stars. So don't, if you're like, I don't have this, how do I keep the stars? But if you had it, you could paint the whole thing light blue, splatter it with resist, so it'll make the light blue stars. Then paint it the next darker blue, splatter it with resist, then you'll get slightly darker blue. So you can also use it to protect the purity of colors in certain areas. It can be layered at any point in a watercolor. For most other media, I would recommend, and when I say the word media, I'm talking about what you're making the art with. So like if you're making watercolors, the media. Right now, my media, digital. Colored pencil, different media. Most other media with white details, I recommend adding them as the last layer. But for watercolor, because it is transparent, you don't usually have white unless you go and specifically get a white. You use the white of the paper. Now I go and get a white jelly roller or a white acrylic paint pen and use it as the last layer because I both like the effect it makes, and then there are some areas like in this that I think are too small to block off. But some people, if they want to keep their white, will use their resist a lot. All right. So now that we have our drawing, with any kind of media, until you're very comfortable with it, it is advised to always work lighter to darker. With watercolor, what this means is mixing a lot of water into your paint to make that lighter, more water, lighter color. With acrylic or oil paint, that could mean mixing it with white. Like I said, we are going to be using one color, and that color is going to be, let's go with this. So I am not going to use anything but colors within this square. So it is this shade of blue, either mixed with white, black, mixed with white, or mixed with black and white, which is what we call a tint when it starts getting gray into it. So that is another thing to keep in mind. When you are mixing colors, I'm going to, over here, make a new little test palette, and I do recommend having one of these for yourself. Just grab an extra piece of scrap paper and have a little test palette so you can make sure your color is right before you add it or anything like that. So let me mark some of this down so I can show you what I'm talking about. So if this is the color I'm using at its purest. If I mix this color with black, and let me add a whole bunch over here, or I mix it with white, what happens is that with white it gets lighter, yeah, with black, it gets darker. Woo-hoo. There it goes. Okay, so what happens, and actually you can kind of see it doing it here because of the way it blends. Oops. That said, if you have a color, oops, that is already mixed with black or white, and you combine them together, you are not just going to make this color lighter. So say I have, where'd it go? This dark blue that is mixed with black. And then I have this light blue that is mixed with white. If I combine them together, they are now not just going to get darker, they're going to get grayer. So once you have black, white, and a color together, it becomes a tint. Tints can be very, very useful. This is not necessarily like a wrong thing to do. It is just something to watch out for, because a lot of people will unintentionally make tints and not realize they've mixed the black and white together, and it grays things out. So for something like, you can see this would be beautiful for like a gray, stormy, foggy setting. But for our like crisp, clear night, I'm gonna wanna do more of this kind of thing where the two don't mix with each other. Hopefully all that made sense. So I'm gonna start with a lot of blue, and I'm gonna load up my paintbrush with a lot of pigment, and I'm gonna, okay, I am gonna do 2 layers for this, because if not, it'll erase this. And watercolor would not do that. So I'm gonna put a whole bunch of paint on it, and then I'm gonna get a whole bunch of water, and I'm gonna spread that paint out. I'm just gonna spread it out over the whole picture, because nothing in the picture except that white moon, which I already forgot to keep clear, which is why I add my white at the end. I don't want anything in the picture to be lighter than this. And then I'm gonna do it again. Boop. And again, I'm just loading my paintbrush up with color, loading it up and up and up. So there's a whole lot of color. And then I'm using my water to spread that around. And as it gets to the edges, just like in the picture, it's getting lighter already without me having to do anything but add . So for the sake of translation from analog to digital with this, bigger brushes is kind of the equivalent of more paint or more water. So when I'm going to this big brush, I'm putting on more paint. This big brush, I'm giving it more water. All right. And right now I don't have to have a lot of control. I'm just sort of laying down colors. It doesn't matter, like I'm not going dark enough that since I know I can fix that moon at the end, that I have to worry about anything, as long as I don't go darker than Sapphire's hair. Which, if you're not familiar with the show, the light bluish one is Sapphire and the dark blue one is Ruby. So it's not really, I mean, that's kind of the colors they are. All right. Now I sort of want to start getting a little bit more specific. So what I kind of notice is that Sapphire's hair is pretty much this pretty blue that I want to keep it. So I'm going to go in with my just my water and kind of make sure that her whole hair is evenly colored. And now I'm going to do my best to keep that part as clean as possible. That may mean going in with water again and cleaning it up as I go. But that is because her hair is a slightly different color, and a slightly different blue. Now I'm going to intentionally make it a little bit of that tint that I was talking about. So I'm going to intentionally make it just a smidge grayer in the sky. So I'm going to kind of come through here and drop some white. And let that spread out. And this is different than just leaving through the white of my paper, because the white of the paper isn't going to change the paint color. It's just more or less paper on here. This is actually making the paint a different color. And it will make it a little lighter, which I know seems counterintuitive to what I just did. If you're using watercolor, you usually have a color called China White. It will make your paint a little bit more opaque, but that is probably what you want to hit. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to add a little tiny amount of dark. And I'm still, even though I'm just kind of dripping it in, I'm still going to let it go in the places where it is darkest. And I'm going to start adding only a little bit at a time. So I would want lots of water. And you're just adding in a little bit and a little bit. And you can see that it's starting to turn to those grayer colors already. And I'm making a lot of swirling motions as I go around the moon, so that if by some chance I never touch this part of the painting again, it's still making those circles around the moon. And I'm just keeping my motions really light and loose, except around Sapphire. With Sapphire, I'm going in and I'm being a lot more precise. Not intensely at this level, because this is still pretty close to her hair, so if it mixes in, I can just kind of come in here and clean it up. But she is now being preserved, so I want to keep her edges clean. And Dion just made a very good point, especially with some watercolor sets have a black paint. Some will give you India ink. India ink is very, very strong. So that's this little area over here. Always kind of tap it to make sure you aren't about to roll, or like just roll over everything you've done. The one nice thing, the watercolor is also very forgiving. You can dot a lot of that water on. And I've recently learned if you have a Mr. Clean eraser, those will erase your watercolors. Yes, yes. Sip and paint. Sip. All right. Now I'm going to start going in with a little bit more of a darker version, because this is a very pretty daytime sky. And I'm going to really start now reinforcing these concentric circles when I lay my paint down. Now, watercolor particularly, well, watercolor is very much a slow paint. Acrylic is very fast, and oil is very, very slow. So depending on what you're painting with, your steps may take a little longer. Yeah, a bunch of senior citizens taught me the magic erase trick, and oh my gosh. It is the best. Alright. So about now, while I'm not going to be obsessed with starting to make it look exactly like the picture, I am starting to actually really pay attention to where these dark patches are best to go, because, well, I'm not uber hung up on them being there just yet. I want to start building the basis for them to be there in a few steps. So places that I feel are darker, or need to be darker, I'm going to go ahead and add this in. Like I still said, we're still watering it all down so much that it doesn't have to be super precise yet. Excuse me. I am both very fast and also have to be done by 5:30, whereas you guys, if you like, can take 12 hours to do this. All right, once again, careful down here by Sapphire's head. One of the unfortunate side effects of this, well, it does make it easier, is you lose a little bit of the spontaneity around the objects that you have blocked off. And I mean, you can keep going in and adding more and more detail around that, but that is spontaneous. Once you start adding detail intentionally, it does always kind of lose a little bit. All right. So like I said, this is still a little too sure for me. All right. Double fisted drinks. Oh. Too close to each other. Oh. All right. Now, from here on out, I am letting go, not entirely, you can never entirely let go of spontaneity in art, but now this is the last layer of me just being loosey-goosey with it. Now I'm going to make sure that I'm really thinking about what I'm putting where and why now. So, one thing I need to make a choice about now is Steven Universe's style is very graphic in that it has, like, these are circles. It uses a lot of very solid shapes that are clearly measured out with like a ruler or something like that, as opposed to more organic shapes, although they are very organic. But it's about rocks, like things reflect that like nature kind of mechanical chemistry nature of things. So I need to decide if I want to break out tools like compasses and rulers and that kind of thing to get this to match, or if I want to keep it a little bit more in my own style, but while I recreate it and be looser. And I think what I'm going to do, I think I'm going to go ahead and keep it looser because this is happy hour. Which just means that my circles won't exactly be perfect. Also, I know that I personally have circular skills that are good enough for this. So that also depends on how much do you trust your circles? How much do you care about how perfect they are versus how close are you at making them perfect? I'm kind of here on both of those. I don't care about them being super perfect, and I make them well enough that it's close enough for me. But that's a artistic choice of how much do you care to put the effort in. All right, so now I'm going to start, and for me it's always easiest once I've got this where like the whole basic of the picture kind of has a basis. So you don't want to, when you start in a picture, you don't want to like hyper focus on one area and get that done really, really well and then go to the next area and hyper focus. Because what happens is that it's really hard to equally reproduce that stuff. So you might end up with one area that's like awesomely, perfectly realistic, and then like you lost some of those colors in your pencil set, so now you can't make the same colors, so your next area is different, and just that kind of thing. So it's always best when you start out to get your whole picture to a certain level of doneness. Then you can focus on more detailed areas. So then you don't have to worry about like, oh no, what if I forget what shade of blue this was? Or what if I can't quite match the random bleed edge of that the next day because I cut it into ninths or something like that. Go ahead and do the whole basis and then hyper focus. Alright. So even though I am focusing, I still want to work on first getting the color into the area before I work on blending it in. Now, depending on the media you're using and how fast it dries, you can do just around the circle or you can do all of them. Watercolor, like I said, is about medium. Acrylics dry very fast. Oils, colored pencils, all that, they're not gonna, I mean, colored pencils never dry. And oils sometimes dry, but one of my favorite art stories is that they're pretty sure, at least some Van Goghs, that there's still wet paint at the bottom of it because he laid it on so thick that the top's dried, but the bottom hasn't yet. Okay. And I notice if you look at this one, it gets the, like, it's not concentric around the moon, it starts opening up so it's thinner at the base. And I want to add a little bit more over here, but I think it's just going to get maybe a little bit right there. That stuff's probably just going to get blended in a little bit. Okay, and then now I'm going to go in and I'm just going to start, actually let's start again. I'm just going to start blending it in. Now, one thing to keep in mind though, I want to blend it in, but make sure you don't over blend. And that can be really hard when you're learning to blend, is you want stuff blended, but nature does have hard lines in it. Like, humans do have hard lines in their face, so don't make everything super, super smooth, or else it'll start to look like old CGI graphics where they didn't have any textures. That, like, stonks meme. Okay, so you notice that there is a glow here around the moon and these layers of the moon. I am not going to make that glow by adding light. I am going to make that glow by butting the darkness up against it. At certain points, I might want to add a little bit of white to kind of bump it up a little bit more. But to start with, I want to try to make it with the darkness rather than the lightness, because I have it fairly light at this point. So adding more dark to make it the night sky is not hard. Whereas if I try to make it with the light, like add more light paint right off the bat, I might run out of places to go with that. See, I can add a lot more dark and get where I'm going. And it's always easier to add more than to take it away. And don't feel like once you've finished an area, you can't go back and touch it up. Your whole painting may have changed a shade. It might have gotten darker. Like, there are a lot of good reasons to go back in. And I know it can be hard to balance when you go back in and when you let it rest. And I have no perfect answers for you. That's just, it's hard. Welcome to the struggle. Overworking things is definitely something that artists have to look out for, but you just got to learn when to let things go and when not to. And sometimes you'll find that, excuse me, that moving away from it and looking at it again later can drastically help. Okay. If you are using watercolor or acrylics, empty paint-free brushes with water will help you blend. And if you're using oil, the same thing with oil, whatever oil you're using. That is your blending tool. And I'm actually going to come in here and put straight up a little black right in here. Now, in a lot of fine art circles, they say, don't use black, don't use black. So there are some times when that is very valid, and you should always make your own black, especially oil paints, because the way oil paints work, the reason they glow is because light's literally going into the paint and reflecting back out at you, and using black oil paint undoes that a little bit. Other than that, I think it's really up to your discretion, especially if you're doing illustrative art where sometimes black is really important to set the mood or bring the person's focus. All right. Now the sky gets lighter as it gets towards the ground for these happy space rock lesbians. But this is, it does get lighter, but this is, woo, that's a little bit too much. This is really drastically lighter. Let's add some more of that in there. Alright, so if I wasn't working monochromatic right now, I might add a little bit of a yellow or an orange. If you can see how there's like almost a dustiness right down here. But I really want to keep this monochromatic, which means I only use one color, so we're not actually going to go exploring that right now. That is a creative choice I'm making and sticking with. Now again, I want to be very careful down here by Sapphire's head. Okay. Gonna up my brush size, aka add more water to bring this in here and blend it even more. Oopsie, I got Sapphire a little messy. I'm gonna go fix her in a minute. Now the one benefit of digital is I'm not on any timer with this. And There are actually lots of benefits to digital, I will not lie. Okay, so now I have to go down and fix Sapphire a little bit. So I'm going to load up my paintbrush just with water and use that to blend these edges smooth. There we go. And smooth stuff out a little bit more. And again, that'd just be using a brush, just load it up with whatever media you're using. I am using the Wet Bleed blender. In Sai, I know there's the watercolor tool can do this really well. I've never figured out what's best for it in Photoshop. I feel like this is where we're gonna kind of leave our sky, except now I do want to go in. Like I said, most places I don't want to worry too much about adding light back in to make these glows. The one place I do, and remember again, this is gonna make it a tint, it's gonna be a gray or white. I want to go in right around literally the moon. And this is the thing about using light white. Like if you're using your China white in your watercolor, it's not going to be a super impressive white. That's why I say for the white at the end to use like a acrylic or a jelly roller, because it's not opaque. Even when it's opaque, it's not opaque. Gouache or I've heard a lot of different ways to say it. I always said it gouache in school. It can be a little bit more opaque, but even it's not super intense. And I think, yeah, that'll make that like pattern it has on it. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make sure everything on this layer is okay. I'm going to come down here and blend out Sapphire a bit more. Make sure she's nice and cleaned up. And now I'm going to tackle also Ruby. Let me make sure everything is last minute blended before I put all this dark color in here for Ruby. Okay, Ruby is like Sapphire, just this solid kind of color. So I want to mix up enough of the color that I'm using for her. Now for me, that's really easy because mixing up enough of the color is doing that. And it's infinite, but if you're using ones, make sure you mix up enough because you want to lay it in there very smoothly. And whatever color you use, you want to fill that whole space as smoothly and evenly as possible. So whatever paint it is, you're going to want it wet enough that it paints, but not so liquidy that it becomes transparent as you paint it. And you can definitely come over here and use your chart to check that out before you start painting with it. And of course, something to keep in mind with this too, this is Ruby and Sapphire, but you can make these heads anyone. And like, especially if you have, say, a cute queer femme couple in your life that's into Steven Universe, making this in their favorite color could be an amazing gift. Here and clean this up a little bit more. So now you want to make sure you let this dry all the way, whatever you have done with it, and we're going to start adding our stars. So depending on what your opaque white is, there's a couple different ways you can do this. One, the first step, and I'm going to use a different layer for this because if not, I don't have like a dry canvas. For the moon, you just want to take it and fill in this half of it. If you want, you can even kind of leave those like streaks there. I'm not going to bother with that. And just fill that in solidly with your jelly roller or your paint or whatever it is. And then let that dry. Alright, so there are two ways to do this. One, the most straightforward, if you have jelly roller or paintbrush, whatever it is, you just load it up and you go and you put them in. You want to mix like circle ones of different sizes. You can do like if you make a dot and then pull with some water or really anything. You can even use like the end of a pencil or something and pull the paint or the mark out like that. You'll make the star one, so just go from the middle and whisk it out. You can also just even, where'd my drawing go? There it is. Oh. You can draw them. You can put in real constellations if you know like a favorite constellation or a zodiac or something like that. You can put that in. Let's see. My favorite is the Pleiades. I have it on my leg, so let me... Oh my god. I look at this like every day. You'd think I'd know it. Please don't judge me. I think it's like that. Make sure to change their size a lot. And make them random, which also sometimes random means they clump together, right? Don't put any here. Nope, there's no stars between us and the moon. Alright. Then, the other thing you can do, if you want a little bit more spontaneity and you have a paint, like say you have a white acrylic paint to do this with, mix it up with a little bit of water, whatever makes it liquid. You can also do this with like a white gouache. Load a whole bunch up on your paintbrush, and I'm going to do this with my pen so I don't break my Cintiq. Hold your finger like this, hold it over your piece of art and go boom. That'll make a splatter effect. So this is a little bit messy. Make sure that you're not doing it like right near your cell phone or anything like that. And you may want to go in and either like, you might get some on like Sapphire's head to touch up or something like that. But I personally I kind of like just going in and dotting in a whole bunch of stars. Makes me think about how many stars there are out there. If you have different color paints, you can also do like we talked about, like different color ones. That'll give it a little bit more depth. Something to know if you don't. If they twinkle, they're stars. If they don't twinkle, they're planets. Planets can't, because of the atmosphere, they don't twinkle. Or our atmosphere. Something to do with atmospheres makes them not twinkle. Didn't know you were going to get a very poor astronomy lesson, did you? My favorite moment, I just saw the mod question, in the Steven universe. Oh my gosh, I have a lot of them, but I think my favorite is actually Ruby and Sapphire, although not this part, the episode with the song, how am I forgetting this right now? Well, I know how. But I was literally just listening to it.
Stronger Than You?
Not Stronger Than You. Take a moment to think of just Flexibility, love, and trust.
Here comes a thought.
Here comes a thought, yep. An astronomy lesson and a song. You guys are spoiled. I bet you're really feeling it right now. So spoiled. I think about that song a lot when my day has not been so great, or my brain wants to tell me some lies about the world or my place in it. All right. And now you have. Keep working on it. We can keep adding the stars forever. But this is pretty much it. Does anybody have any questions? Uh-oh. I don't know what happened. I don't know why you can't hear me. Nothing changed. I'm so sorry. Okay. But yeah, I think right now taking a moment to think of flexibility, love, and trust is a very, very good idea. Like I said, you can add your own constellations like I did with the Pleiades up here. You can add, I mean, this is aliens, so I'm going to add a little UFO. It's probably one of their people. Doot, doot, doot. And one of the cool things too, if you do have digital, is you can do things like this. Let's see. Wow. Oh, that's really sparkly. Is it these ones? Nope. Alright, that one's better. Oh no, those are really cheesy. Or maybe not. Not cheesy in certain settings, but cheesy for this. Oops, now they're too tiny. Now they're too big. It's my Sailor Moon sparkles. There we go. And yes, we absolutely would love to see any that you post. I'll make sure to post mine too. And yeah, I hope that this helps. I think right now art is really, really helpful to focus on and spend some time zenning out and enjoying yourself. A little me time. Alright, I think then we are going to go ahead and wrap that up. Nobody has any questions? Yay! I'm glad you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it quite a lot too. I haven't done a single layer painting like this in a long time, and it's a really, really good skill to help with your every art skills, but especially your digital art skills. Alright guys, you have a good night. Enjoy your Thursday night, and hopefully we will see you again soon. Goodbye!